I am excited to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Bill Bonvillian. Bill Bonvillian is a man who brings incredible expertise to this. He is a lecturer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a senior director for special projects at MIT's Office of Open Learning, and a senior director of MIT's Initiative for Knowledge, Innovation, and Manufacturing. Bill is currently conducting research projects on workforce education and innovation policy. Bill co-authored Workforce Education, A New Roadmap with Sanjay Sarma. The book was released in 2021 by MIT Press, and it evaluates new models for workforce education. He has an extensive background in research, education, and public service, and we are honored and excited to bring Bill's message today. I'd like to introduce Bill Bonvillian.
Thank you. You know, I'm here because I'm incredibly excited about the opportunity that your state has got. I think, you know, I don't know of any state that has got this opportunity, and obviously there's a lot of short-term things that need to get dealt with in the workforce side, but there's an opportunity now to plan kind of longer term in a transformational kind of way. So I'm going to share with you some thinking and work that I've been doing on workforce education with the idea of maybe putting some ideas on the table. So we've got a long-standing job quality problem. We've got increasing economic inequality, not economic convergence. It's a festering problem in this country for 15 years. There's an economist named David Otter who calls this the Barbell Problem. So on one bell of the barbell, we've got a growing, thriving upper middle class that's doing better than it ever has. And then we've been thinning out on the bar, the middle class, and shunting some of that middle class to a growing, lower-end services sector that is frankly not well paid. So technological advances, particularly in the IT space, as we all know, are putting many quality jobs out of reach for workers who didn't get the right skill set and training. So new jobs are requiring higher-end skills. This is what the barbell looks like when you kind of graph it. And let me just describe it to you briefly, because I think it's a painful slide. It's a slide of the growing economic inequality. So you see, this is over a very extended period of time in the United States. You can see that top line rising, right? That's, you know, ongoing growth and productivity. And then below that is the average level, that blue line, that average compensation level. That stays right with the productivity line because the upper middle class is doing so well, right? They're staying with the curve, right? They're riding that productivity curve. But then you look down to the next line below that, the red line. That's median compensation. That's where the people in the middle are, right? And you can see that that number has been stagnating. And then below that, the light blue line below that is average compensation of production and non-supervisory workers. They're not doing well. Their incomes have been stagnating. We split the working class off from the rising productivity curve and the gains that could potentially come with it. And we have to fix this, and workforce education is a major element towards what we have to do. So let's look at a little more depth at some of this. This is production productivity, and it lags behind competitor nations. And the red line is the United States. You can see overall, we've got stagnating productivity in the US. Our competitors continue to rise. That's key because you get productivity from capital investment and entry of new technologies, but you also get it from workforce. And this is like a signal that we've got a major workforce issue. Let's look at three of the pillars of Oregon's economy. Manufacturing. Manufacturing has been a middle-class pathway, particularly for men without college, for a very long period of time historically in the United States. But median income, and we just saw the numbers, median income is down for men without high school diplomas. It's down 20%, which is a dramatic number. And for those with high school diplomas or some college, it's down 13%. These are dramatic numbers. And manufacturing employment fell by 1/3 between 2000 and 2010, and only 18% since 2010. Only 18% of those jobs are back. So we laid off 1/3 of our manufacturing workforce. And back to that middle class pathway, who did that nail, right? It nailed the American working class big time. We see it, we sense this. In particular, it nailed minority communities. African Americans are a little more than 10% of the manufacturing workforce. Hispanics are about 15%, right? Those communities got really nailed on their pathway to the middle class. That had been an historical American pathway. We messed that pathway up completely. We have the highest overall labor non-participation rate. In other words, people that have taken themselves out of the workforce. Our participation rate is only 62% of work-age workers in the workforce. And we have lessons from the pandemic, lessons from this new war, that tell us that more resilient supply chains are critical, right? We're going to have to rethink manufacturing. These forces are driving us to it. Are we ready for this? Well, manufacturing jobs are going to be, even if we do nothing else, right? We're going to have 2, and some people estimate 4 million manufacturing jobs because we've got an aging workforce in manufacturing, right? The demographics are going to drive a big gap in that workforce, and advanced manufacturing, which is what we need to get to compete, it's going to require higher skills. Pillar number 2, healthcare delivery. All of us know what these issues look like. We've got an aging population, higher healthcare demands. There are a host of new medical technologies that are creating a host of new kinds of professions in healthcare. The results, more jobs with higher skill needs, so new training and education systems are needed in these new fields as well. You know, there are barriers here. There are barriers to entry from the established professions that have got to cope with these kind of new entrant territories. You know, here's an area where the kind of scale-up you can get from online could be helpful. A third pillar in the Oregon economy is your very strong information tech sector. We graduate 85,000 computer science graduates at the college level every year. And then we add to that 65,000 people coming from all over the world through H-1B visas with similar credentials, right? And that's not close to meeting the needs in this sector, not close. Companies want college grads, but if they're going to meet the needs, they're going to have to think more broadly. We're going to need a no-collar or new-collar workforce. We're going to need to reach that high school graduate community in a much more systematic kind of way if we're going to meet the needs in this sector. And it's a huge, good-paying economic sector. So this is a greatly expanding sector. There's big new opportunities. We aren't organized to pursue the communities that we're going to have to go after to staff this sector. For example, apprenticeships with intensive education built into them could be a very valuable tool here for reaching those communities. And you know, not everybody has to be, you know, a super programmer. There's a whole range of skills in the IT sector that we need and have gaps in. So there's major workforce opportunities there. So each of these 3 sectors is different, but each has a major workforce education need. So in manufacturing, it's been stabilizing in recent years, but we're going to need to find 2 to 4 million workers in the next decade due to retirements nationwide. And they are going to need not simply the existing skills. We're going to need to move to advanced manufacturing to compete. So they're going to need new skills. In health, an expanding sector with new healthcare professions being created with the new technologies that are entering, with new skills required. Big training issues. IT, expanding sectors, serious skills and demand problems. All of these are characterized by extensive new technology entry that requires new skills. And I think most of us in the room would agree that we've got a somewhat broken workforce education system. And let me run down some areas where I think we need some attention. Deepest of all, the transition from school to work, right? We don't do this well in this country, right? There's this huge barrier, school, work, big gap, big barrier in between, they don't connect. And we're losing an enormous amount of talent and losing a whole lot of opportunities for people because of that disconnect. You know, you contrast this with major European countries, it's a pretty seamless system in their workforce education mechanisms. Countries like Germany, Austria, Switzerland have famous workforce education systems, and they are deeply connected. Now, we're not going to do what those countries do. We're too egalitarian for kids to decide what their careers are going to be at age 12, right? We're not going to do that. But there are lessons that we can learn from the connectivity here and for creating the opportunities that apprenticeships can offer. We largely ended vocational high schools in the 1970s, starting in the 1970s. That was a big reform movement. The plan was to send everybody to college, only we didn't do that, right? So now we're stuck with the kind of mess that we created here. We have community colleges, and in many ways there are kind of secret weapons in this workforce space, but they're underfunded, and too often their completion rates aren't high enough. Employers in the past have been disengaged, and they don't act together, right? They don't act in collaborative ways to kind of manage the system. Yet they are critical actors in connecting this work and learning sites. They've got to be involved. Colleges and universities aren't engaged in workforce preparation, by and large. Colleges and universities, and I'm from one, they don't think it's their problem, right? They think that's for high schools and community colleges. But they own, remember, they own the crucial credential now. They own that college degree that's the key factor into getting into that middle class territory. So they own the credential and they're in denial, right? So how do we engage them? And what role do they have to play? And look, we're missing lifelong learning in our system, by and large. We don't have a transferable skills certification system in most fields. Some exceptions. IT is an exception, for example. But by and large, we've got a situation where employers have applicants come to them and they have no way of evaluating their credentials or backgrounds. The workers apply for a job. They have no idea what the employer wants. And the educators don't know what to educate for. So somehow we're going to have to embed in this system some employer-recognized credentials that begin to create more of an information system behind these labor markets. Our education and labor department programs are not aligned. It's not their fault, it's the way their statutes are written, but the labor department programs focus on the unemployed and underemployed. And those are very important segments, but they're not organized to deal with this whole big upskilling problem that we've now got. And they don't reach incumbent workers either. The education department is oriented to degree programs, really not to workforce education, because of the way their statutes are written too. So these programs don't tie into each other. As I said, we've got a weak labor market information system, and deep here is this work-learn gap, because jobs increasingly tend to go to the college-educated. We've got growing IT, new demand for new skills. The result is that new high or middle school jobs require education beyond high school, but only 1/3 of Americans have college degrees. And college and universities, as I said, are really not engaged, even though they own that crucial credential. High school and community colleges are not well connected to workplaces. So we need a new system here, a new connection between work and school. Let me just walk through a few policy implications. We've talked about what the problems are. Let's talk about some of the policy approaches. I'll just kind of summarize these. We've got short courses, and the shorter courses need to be in modules that can connect to community college certificates and degrees, that can be stacked, right? This is a policy approach I think we increasingly need to take. It's harder for incumbent workers And the average age of community college students, I think as everybody in this room knows, is about 29, right? They're in the workforce already. They've got families, they've got responsibilities, they've got jobs. This is not an easy task for them to take 2 years out of their lives, right? We've got to manage this in a more stackable way so they can get through this system. We need to embed, as I mentioned, industry-recognized certifications into the degrees and courses that we're scaling up. We're going to need new education technologies. I'll talk more about this in a minute. We're going to need to expand the reach of community college programs. They need to reach community college students, but they also need to reach incumbent workers to a larger scale than they are now, and they need to reach high school students. We need apprenticeships, and we can embed apprenticeships into our community college programs. Community colleges can now run apprenticeship programs in cooperation with employers. It's not only for the registered apprenticeship programs the Labor Department has. Community colleges can sponsor these in cooperation with employers. So they could be key actors here in helping move apprenticeships into their course material in cooperation with employers. So it can be, an apprenticeship can more effectively combine the training that comes on the job with the kind of deep education that can occur at a higher education institution. We need to turn around the completion rate at community colleges. We need more kind of technical and comprehensive high school programs. We need new curricula for the advanced fields that are increasingly upon us. There's a couple of sources in advanced manufacturing for this. The ATE program at the National Science Foundation is a big aid to community colleges in developing this advanced curriculum. And the Advanced Manufacturing Institutes, there's now 16 of these spread around the country, are developing curricula in their specialized fields like robotics or photonics or new materials or composites and so on. They're developing specialized curricula in the fields in which they're stood up. So we've got sources here, but boy, are they underfunded, but they are a potential resource as you all think about the new curricula that you're going to need. We're going to need unifying efforts at the state level. We need to bring together employers, schools, local governments, state governments, tie into the federal programs, but we really need these collaborations and running them at a state level and then within that in different regions that reflect different employment patterns around the state, and we're going to need a better labor market information system. Let me briefly look at 4 areas: the employer role, the university role, the community college role, and an online education role. There's a critical employer role. This is employers out there, this is not someone else's problem. This is now your problem, and you can't leave it to schools and governments alone to fix. They don't know what you need. You're going to need a better school-to-work transition, and you control the work side of that. So I think it's going to require a new level of engagement on the employer side. We've got shortages in skilled workers, and COVID actually may have accelerated kind of an ongoing demographic shift because the next generation is smaller and they're not educated in the needed skill set because we don't have the system to educate for that yet. So employers really need to work together. Single company solutions tend to die, right? A single company will hire for the contract that just came in, right? And when that's filled, they'll drop their training requirements, or they'll go through an economic downturn. Employers need to act as groups. And you saw from some of the numbers back earlier in the slides, but the large companies tend to have established training programs. Small and mid-sized firms don't, right? And they're the big problem in our productivity numbers. They're responsible for 50% of US production output. They are particularly weak on workforce education. So we need to bring them into this system too. So we're going to need consortia of employers, groups of employers working together. And then again, as part of this, we're going to need to break down that work to learn barrier and build apprenticeships and internships and work experience into these programs. Collaborations with community colleges, with high schools, all of these require collaborations at the heart of this that employers are going to need to be key to. University role, right? I talked earlier about how universities were in denial, it was their problem, but what can they do? They can help in organizing delivery frameworks overall and pulling actors together. They can manage, for the online education piece that I'll get to in a minute, they can manage the platforms. They can manage the development of online courses because most of them now have studios and develop their own online courses. Community colleges don't have the resources to do that by and large. They can help in the actual skill delivery in the higher end skills. But those higher end skills, frankly, are skills that the workforce as a whole is going to be needing to move towards. So they've got to be connected into this overall system as well. And then they can help in looking at the kind of learning science side and making sure that when we develop new training, and particularly new online training, that it builds in what we know about the best ways to learn and teach and convey these new skill sets. Let me mention some, on the community college front, some exemplary community college examples. Lorain County Community College in Ohio. Very innovative school, developing a lot of new curriculum. It's at the core of something called Ohio TechNet. So Ohio has independent community colleges, but every other week they all band together, and during COVID it was online, to figure out who's developing what new curriculum and how they can all use it and share it and help train each other's trainers, right? So they're collaborating, independent schools across the state, but they're collaborating together on developing workforce education, and they are driven with an alliance with the Ohio Association of Manufacturers, which has put workforce education at the top of their concern list, pushes state support to develop this new system, and then is closely linked in the development of these new curricula with the community colleges. Ivy Tech in Indiana, they have a unified community college system. There are advantages to this and some disadvantages, but the advantage is that an employer in Columbus can see a degree that a worker has obtained from the community college in that area, and that's transferable completely. The employer understands what that degree is because there's a common curriculum across the schools. Now, there is 1/3 of the curriculum is still controlled independently by each of the participating schools in this network, but that common curricula, and there's a dynamic group at the center of this that controls entry of new curriculum pieces, has worked very well in that state. So there may be some examples there. Ashton-Tuck Community College in the center of Connecticut. They reach not simply community college students. They have a program with 5 area high schools now, where those high school students come in their junior year and spend the afternoon learning technical skill sets at the community college. And they have 3 times as many incumbent workers in the central part of Connecticut, and that's a heavy aerospace sector, getting upskilled into the new skill sets that are going to be required in the new technologies that are entering the aerospace sector, like additive manufacturing. So they reach 3 categories. They're like a trifecta. In addition, the state has figured out you can't do advanced technology education unless you have the equipment, the latest equipment for students to actually work on, hand-on, right? So they've created 4 advanced technology equipment centers that are shared by groups of community colleges for the kind of highest end of that kind of learning experience. And that community college is one of those centers. The TCAT program in Tennessee, the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technologies. This was their old vocational high school system. There's 27 of them spread through the whole state, rural areas, urban areas, very different kinds of communities. Across the board, all 27 of them have managed to create an 81% completion rate. Community colleges often have a 1/3 completion rate, right? They've got 81%, right? And they have an 86% job placement rate in this field of study that the students studied in. So in other words, they're getting the job in the area that they studied. These are dramatic numbers in higher education, and they have driven these rates by integrating what used to be the stovepipe for remedial education. Often in community colleges, you have to take a whole bunch of remedial courses, particularly math, before you even get to go to college. And then you get lost in the remedial course. And you don't see what the possibilities are from your technical course for a career. So they merge the technical course and the remedial course, and the remedial content reflects the technical area. So you see how relevant it is. And that has been one of the major drivers that has enabled them to come up with this remarkable completion rate. Charleston, South Carolina, Trident Tech, technical college, community college in South Carolina. They've developed a youth apprenticeship program with 5 area high schools that changes the lives of high school students. Suddenly, they're not just spending the day in high school experience, which can be often, as we all know, somewhat disruptive. They spend the morning in high school, and by the way, their apprentice employers tell them they got to take the science and math courses. And then they spend the middle part of the day at the technical school, right, doing their technical courses, and then they work for an employer in the afternoon. What this means to high school students is that they're in a much more mature environment for 2/3 of the day. And it's transformative, has a great effect on them, and they are very well paid. They're kings of the hill back in their high schools. MassBridge, this is an attempt by the state of Massachusetts to build an advanced manufacturing curriculum across its community colleges by just the kind of collaboration that you all are starting to debate and put together. Massachusetts is in a similar kind of state of trying to put these pieces together in a collaborative way. Online, that's a scaling element. And the existing system is not producing the numbers we need, right? We're going to have to scale to meet this upskilling need. Beware of what we could call the perils of Zoom. Higher education survived because of Zoom during the pandemic, but Zoom, Teams, WebEx, the classes don't take advantage of what online education can actually be. They are asynchronous, but we really need synchronous in order to build in the learning science. So bite-sized chunks, right? We learn in about 10-minute segments. If you go past the 10 minutes, and I'm over the 10-minute limit, by the way, you start to lose it, right? We have mind wandering. It's a survival instinct, right? You don't want to be too focused. You got to be listening for the saber-toothed tiger to come through your grass roof, right? Make sure you don't get nailed. So this is Darwinian, right? We're not going to lose mind wandering. It's an important survival skill. But an hour-long lecture, that doesn't work very well. It's very inefficient education. Online needs to be in bite-sized chunks. Spaced learning. In other words, you want to reinforce learning just at the moment when you're starting to forget. And you have to do that spaced learning with reiteration in it. We need to do continuous assessment and feedback loops, which can be built into online education in a way in which they can't be in a classroom setting. They can be personal, right? We need to create desirable difficulties. In other words, just challenging enough to be able to be solvable, but challenging enough to make you think. So these and a whole set of other lessons from online education are there. Let me just summarize with some recommendations in the few minutes that I've got left. Regional workforce efforts by groups of employers tied to state, regional governments, and community colleges. That consortium has got to be at the center of what we accomplish. The trifecta, right? Noted earlier, community colleges need to reach, as well as community college students, they need to reach incumbent workers and high school students as well. That would greatly expand the reach of our workforce education programs. We need youth and community college apprenticeship programs to be built in cooperation with employers to break down that work-learn barrier. We need to turn around the community college completion rate. We need these shorter, stackable, more modular kinds of certificates that in turn are attached to degrees. They stack towards degrees. And we need to embed in them industry certifications that industry will recognize. We need to integrate the federally stovepipe programs at the state level. So even though they may be stovepiped at the federal level, the states can integrate these programs in imaginative and new kinds of ways. We need to build a lifelong learning system. We need new labor market information systems that need to be credentialing based. These are some of the things we need to do. We need new education technologies to help with the scaling side, and these need to be thought through from the learning science perspective, not just more Zoom We've really got to do asynchronous, thoughtful online education here, but it can help us scale. It's not blended learning is best, and you have to do, you have to do hands-on education and workforce ed, so there's got to be a major component of that. But online can be supplemental, and we can shift a fair amount of the content to that, and that'll help with scheduling for community college students. That's the story. And again, let me just close with the point that I think you have a remarkable opportunity here that I know of no other state that has pulled together these resources to tackle this task. You're going to be able to tackle it at scale. And I know you've got a lot of short-term needs that you've got to meet given the current employment challenges we've got. But developing a long-term effort to really use those resources to transform your system, I think will be absolutely critical and gives you an amazing opportunity if you have. Thank you.